That's interesting, David, because, as you know, Larry Bossidy wrote a book called Execution. It's a fantastic book about actually delivering results. I suppose what your book is similar to that in the sense that it's very much about delivering results on a daily or minute by minute, basis. Is that right?
Right. If you're going to change anything, you have to change it at the behavior level where the action really takes place. And the action really takes place that says, gee, at the phone, what do I need to do? What do I need to do about this merger or acquisition? What do I need to do about this key economic issue that just landed in our plate? What do I need to do about this intelligence we just got about our competitive, disadvantage that we're now at given the technology that showed up this morning? And so getting that down to, yes, what do you need to do? And you can have all the vision and all the brainstorming and all the strategizing and all the planning and whatever, but it ultimately comes down to who's doing what at the phone, at the computer, at the hardware store, at their whatever, down at the physical level. So that mundane level of the level of next action, what's the next physical thing that has to happen, is such a grounding event. But by the time you're down at that level, most professionals have over 200 next actions right now. If they really got the inventory clear of all of their goals and all of their projects and all the things that need to be done about them. And managing at that level of mundaneness with a sophisticated elegance is, I guess, where GTD is, sort of shines, because most of the stuff just doesn't stand up to that kind of heat and at the same time map to the more strategic and creative and higher vision stuff that these things need to align with.
Dave, that's great. Just before we go into a little bit further into depth into your system, Getting Things Done, or GTD, maybe you can just tell me, if there's a smart aleck in the room, they may say something like, well, why don't you call your book Getting the Right Things Done as opposed to Getting Things Done? If you listen to 80-20 and Pareto law, etc., that's what they may well ask. So first of all, can I just ask, does your system allow for prioritization based on what is really important as opposed to the noise?
Oh, exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. I didn't spend, in my first book, I mentioned, and in not so much in a cursory way, but yes, absolutely, there are a lot of factors that go into priority. By the way, if the most strategic thing you need to do in your life is to make a phone call, but you don't have a cell phone signal, forget it. You can't do it. So when it comes down to the minute-to-minute kind of decision making, there's an awful lot of variables and limitations that come into what we can do at any point in time. The prime driver, obviously, is what's the most important thing. And by default, everybody's only doing one thing at a time, so then you're not doing everything else. So everybody's constantly making priority decisions all the time. Yeah. And in truth, if you're not really working on what some part of you is internally or more deeply committed to be doing, you will feel out of control. So the GTD aspect says, well, look, why is that on your mind? So even the very simple GTD principles actually can be applied and need to be applied to identify the things that are pulling on us. And that may be a strategic vision. It may be, I don't feel like I'm lined up yet with my life purpose. I haven't really shown up yet. Oh, great, let's write that down. Throw that in your in basket. I need cat food. We'll write that too. So we're kind of equally respectful and irreverent on the front end about how do I get control by identifying the things that I need to apply the thought process to. But once you've done that, then making decisions about how you allocate resources absolutely have to take those into account. That's why my last book, by the way, spent a lot more time on the horizons of focus, the 6 different horizons that we all have commitments in. And those become more and more subtle to begin to identify, but they're equally important in order to be able to keep control of your life and where you want to be.
And that's where you're talking about sort of being on the runway and then being up to 50,000 feet and the various phases in between.
Exactly. Exactly.
Which is pretty.
I had a good example. I had a very, very senior partner in one of the big consultancies was saying that his most, the way he described what he got out of GTD as he began to apply it, he has a very spiritual orientation in his church, so he thinks a lot about sort of in a ministerial way in terms of being a manager to his people and helping people. He's a good guy. But he said the fascinating thing was it allowed him, he could be dealing with one person that he needed to be very hand-holding and very supportive of, and 20 seconds later be on the phone talking about the strategic plan, and 2 minutes later, realizing he needed to call on an airline reservation, and all of that equally was able to be done with a clear head without having to spend a lot of effort to shift gears. So the ability to be able to shift to the horizon of your focus and to be able to, as I mentioned earlier, to be able to create placeholders for your thinking appropriately, trusting that you're going to loop back around on that strategic plan and on that trip with the airlines and all these other things that we move these things forward with and think about. That's a great feeling to know that you've got a systemic way to be able to both capture that, make decisions about it, and then park the results. So then you walk free. So in that way, you can be totally buried at all these different horizons and truly have nothing on your mind except whatever's currently on your mind. And that's a lovely place to be.
Great. Now, if we can delve into GTD and specifically, maybe you can just start with what are some of the fundamentals of the GTD system?
Keep everything out of your head that has anything to do with commitments that can't be finished in the moment. Sooner than later, make good operational decisions about what exactly those things mean to you. That is, specifically, what is the outcome, if any, you're committed to, and what is the action step that needs to be taken to move toward closure on it. Park the results of that kind of thinking in very appropriate personal systems so that you see what you need to see when you need to see it, in terms of being reminded of things you need to be reminded of and that are relevant to, you know, getting things done in your life. And build in a constant reflection process, at least once a week, building in 1 to 2 hours where you step back and take a look at everything at all these relevant horizons. So some part of you can essentially bring up the rear guard and get on top of it again.
So as I understand it, you know, a lot of people only make a list when they're in, you know, a crisis, and it's probably a little bit too late to be making a list then. But so in your system, nothing stays in the head, everything goes into a list of some form.
Well, there's a difference between the first stage is to capture, and you don't want to organize or analyze that. You just want to capture it. So yes, you do want to capture those ideas into a trusted bucket. Now, most people capture it in their psychic RAM, which is a terrible office with limited space, and is not going to feed it back to you appropriately. So you do need to capture it. That is, you need to externalize what those things are. And you need to be able to have the freedom to let that rest, but not too long. In other words, you don't want to have to answer the phone at home every time the phone rings. You want an answer machine to capture that. And then when you're ready to then access that information and make decisions about it, then you run it back. So exactly the same principle is at work there. I want the freedom. I don't want to stop any idea process at all. I want every single idea in the world. You know, that's why I have my little note taker wallet that I carry with me, because that's where all, you know, probably 80% of my life starts, is with a harebrained idea that starts right here. I have no idea what's on here. You know, and 90% of these, the next day I go, what? Are you kidding? But the 10% that are on here, in other words, nothing is missed. So I over capture. But that's not a to-do list. This is just raw stuff for them that some part of my creativity had the freedom to be able to identify and capture. This is a CEO tool, by the way. It's called somebody else will do something about this. Just let me think and be a visionary. You know, that's that. But then the COO part of me will wake up tomorrow and go, wait a minute, what exactly is that? What do I now need to do with that? So the capture function gets it into the funnel to begin with, and that's a critical first piece. And you're right, most people don't have that habit. Most people still have over half their life in their head in terms of where they're trying to keep hold of that stuff. So that's the first step, but that's very different than having lists to organize the results of actions that come out of thinking through what's on here. So the second stage cannot, the only system that can do the second stage is your mind, and that's make decisions about what this means. So there is no software, there is no hardware, there is nothing other than your own internal intelligence that can decide this note here. Is that important? Is that not important? What am I going to do? No software will do that for you. So the second stage, which is to clarify or specifically define the meaning of what's been captured, only can be done by the senior team once it throws all the stuff up on the wall. It can only be done by you, you know, looking at the note you wrote. But then the conclusion of that says, I need to make that phone call. I need to call this guy about this thing. Okay, now if I don't call him right then, sometimes I may just call him right then. But as I'm looking back, it's a call I need to make, but I'm not going to do it right now. That's when I need to go to stage 3, which is then organize that. And that is where good systems and good tools come into play. Because the tools that can then hold and placehold remembers and remind, your mind can hold 7 things plus or minus 2. And you got over 200 to keep track of if you even defined what those are. So there's no way you can do that without a tool. Any tool works. So you can use paper, you can write it on your arm, you can throw it in folders, you can use software. Any of those things work as long as when I'm at a phone and I have time, show me a list of all the calls I need to make. And you can see that on an iPhone, you can see it on a piece of paper, you can see it anywhere. As long as you have that, when you have a phone and when you have time, you will then see the 10 or 15 phone calls that you've told yourself, you know, that you need to do to be moving things forward in your life in that way. So that's stage 3, which is just making sure that you've got good categories to park the results of this thinking so that it's accessible to you when and where you need to see it.